Welcome to Reading the Bible Together and to Genesis chapter 25, part 1. And I'm splitting the chapter into two because of the two very different subject matters and important stories it contains. The first deals with death and the second deals with birth, but there's common elements between them as well. But first, let's start with part 1, which itself starts with a surprise. After Sarah's death, Abraham marries again. And this time, there's no trouble regarding fathering more children. We read, Abraham had taken another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shuach. Jokshan was the father of Sheba and Dedan. The descendants of Dedan were the Asherites, the Letushites, and the Leomites. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Enoch, Abidah, and Eldah. All these were the descendants of Keturah. So, 6 children, all of whom I bet you've never heard, nor have you heard of their children, nor have you probably heard of Keturah, the second wife. Who is she? Where'd she come from? Well, there are some very important but subtle clues in the story which may provide an answer. And if you're looking for subtle clues, the ancient rabbis are the fellows to consult. These rabbis devoted countless years and razor-sharp focus to figure these things out, and they've been doing so for 1,000 years longer than Christian commentators have been doing. And here's what they propose. Remember in the last study, I pointed out that Isaac, when he met Rebekah, was at Be'er Lahai Roi, the very place where the pregnant Hagar was found by the angel of God after she had run away from the jealous Sarah at that time. Now, Sarah's son Isaac is living there. Chapter 25 makes a point of telling us so in verse 11. So he not only spots Rebekah from there, he's living there in chapter 25. So this is significant. It's pointedly mentioned twice. Be'er Lahai Roi is mentioned twice in as many chapters after just a single mention in chapter 16, and it's never mentioned again in the whole Bible. That means you're supposed to pay attention here. Now, Ishmael, though, the first son of Abraham by Hagar, is mentioned again after being banished together with his mother back in chapter 21. Here in our chapter 25, not only is he mentioned, but he and Isaac, we read, participated together in the burial of Abraham, who dies after a long, long life. Now, if Ishmael had indeed been forever banished, how did he even learn of the death of Abraham, let alone be sufficiently reconciled to the family to participate in Abraham's funeral? Also, in a pre-Google, pre-FaceTime age, how did they even find him to let him know? Last we heard, he was down by Egypt somewhere, learning how to be an archer. Well, the rabbis have an answer. Of course they do. Keturah, the name of Abraham's second wife, is a Hebrew word derived from perfume or fragrant. To whom was the name Keturah given? Well, hang on to your hats. The rabbis tell us it is the Hebrew name given to someone who previously only had an Egyptian name. Hagar. Yes, Hagar, the same Hagar who was Sarah's handmaid who bore Ishmael, Abraham's first son. All those references to Be'er Lahai Roi are pointing us in this direction. Be'er Lahai Roi could well be called the well of Hagar. And here it is. Isaac was over by the well of Hagar when he saw Rebekah. Isaac's living over by the well of Hagar. Here's Hagar's son Ishmael at Abraham's funeral. And here's Abraham married to somebody we've never heard of before. Now, is it Hagar? Now, if so, it's an astonishing reconciliation and a reunification of the divided family. Now, this is complicated stuff. But Rabbi Sacks, once again, may his memory be a blessing, Rabbi Sacks sums it all up in a profoundly meaningful and significant way. He writes this, he says, Ishmael's presence at the funeral is surprising. After all, he'd been sent away into the desert years before when Isaac was young. Until now, we've assumed that the two half-brothers have lived in total isolation from one another, yet the Torah the Hebrew Bible places them together at the funeral without so much as a word of explanation. Now, the sages, those ancient rabbis, pieced together these puzzling details to form an enthralling story. First, as I've done, they point out that Be'er Lahai-Roi, the place from which Isaac was coming when Rebekah saw him, is mentioned only that one time before, the spot where Hagar, pregnant and fleeing from Sarah, encountered an angel. The angel told her to return. Now, the rabbinic commentary on the passage says that Isaac went to Be'er Lahai-Roi in search of Hagar. And when Isaac heard that his father was seeking a wife for him, he said, "Shall I be married while my father lives alone? I will go and return Hagar to him." That's what Isaac's doing at Be'er Lahai-Roi. He's looking for Hagar, in her last known place of refuge. And he wants Abraham to have a second chance at life. So, that's the sage's answer to the second question. Who was Keturah? She was, they said, none other than Hagar herself. Now, we know that it's not unusual for people in the Hebrew Bible to have more than one name, or in the New Testament as well. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had 7 alternate names. Hagar was called Keturah because her acts gave forth fragrance like incense, or a keturah. Now, this indeed integrates Abraham's second marriage as an essential component of the narrative. It's not just there for no reason. Hagar did not end her days as an outcast, if this theory is correct. She returned at Isaac's prompting and with Abraham's consent to become the wife of her former master, to whom she had already given birth to a son. Now, this also changes somewhat the painful story of the banishment of Ishmael. We know that Abraham did not want to send him away. We had earlier read that Sarah's demand that Abraham do so was very grievous in Abraham's sight on account of his son. Nonetheless, God told Abraham to listen to his wife. It's good advice. There is, however, an extraordinary traditional tale. And this kind of traditional tale is known as a midrash. It's not found in the Bible, but it's pieced together from various biblical characters or events. And this midrash, this traditional tale, tells of how Abraham twice visited his son Ishmael. On the first occasion, when Abraham tries to do so, Ishmael was not at home, and his wife, Ishmael's wife, not knowing who Abraham was, refused the stranger bread and water. Now Ishmael continues the tale, finding out that his father had been sent away without so much as a drink or a bite to eat, divorces this woman and marries a woman named Fatima. Now this time when Abraham visited, again not disclosing his identity, the woman gave him food and drink. The tale then says that Abraham stood and prayed before the Holy One, blessed be he, and Ishmael's house became filled with all good things. When Ishmael returned, his wife told him about it, and Ishmael knew that his father still loved him. Father and son, according to this traditional tale, this midrash, Abraham and Ishmael were reconciled. Now, remember this name of Ishmael's second wife is Fatima. And boy, that's significant, because in the Quran, the Muslim holy books, Fatima is also the name of the daughter of Muhammad. The midrash tale we just heard is an 8th century work, formulated about 100 years after the rise of Islam. And here it is making an explicit and positive reference to Islam. A Jewish tale telling a positive story about Islam. So this hidden story about the second marriage of Abraham and the reconciliation between the families of Ishmael and Isaac has immense consequence for our time. Again, Rabbi Sachs, who tells us Jews and Muslims both trace their descent from Abraham, Jews through Isaac, Muslims through Ishmael. The fact that both sons stood together at their father's funeral tells us that they too were reunited. Beneath the surface of this narrative of Genesis chapter 25, the sages read the clues and pieced together a moving story of reconciliation between Abraham and Hagar on one hand and Isaac and Ishmael on the other. Yes, there was conflict and separation, but that was the beginning, not the end. between Judaism and Islam, says the story, there can be both friendship and mutual respect. Abraham loved both his sons and in fact was laid to rest by both his sons. So, there's hope for the future in this story of the past. Perhaps one day, with the help of God and the goodwill of all, there can be reconciliation between Judaism and Islam. We pray that it would be so. Tomorrow, chapter 25, part 2, the story of Jacob and Esau. We'll see you then.